It is Sunday, the 12th of November, 2017, the day after Remembrance Day. But Remembrance Day celebrations or observances are still happening. In fact, there will be one later today here in NDG, in Girouard Park, or more specifically, Vimy Park. And I expect I will attend that. I attended Remembrance Day ceremonies in downtown Montreal yesterday, as I normally do. It's pretty well something I do every year. I might have missed 1 or 2 years here and there, but as a rule I attend and document in photos and more recently video the Remembrance Day ceremonies. And of course, Remembrance Day is about remembering the Canadian soldiers, to say nothing of other soldiers, who have fought and died in wars to protect Canada and to protect democracy and our civil rights and freedoms and so on. And I believe that soldiers who have fought and died in World War I and World War II and the Korean War and various other more recent wars, defending democracy and the civil rights and freedoms that go with democracy, would probably not be very happy to learn that in the 21st century it is still necessary to fight the criminal justice system in Canada to be able to actually engage in peaceful public protest in Montreal. I've been doing a one-man protest in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal since May of 1998, almost 20 years now. And during that time, there have been rather too many interventions by SPVM police officers, that is, police officers of the Service de Police de la Ville de Montréal, where they have essentially abused their power and authority, either through sheer incompetence, but also, I think, through, willful authoritarianism, in ways that seek to prevent me from exercising my constitutionally guaranteed civil right to engage in peaceful public protest. In December of 2000, early December 2000, so just under 17 years ago, I was protesting outside the Unitarian Church of Montreal, and a police car arrived. It had one single police officer in it, Anthony Pompa from Station 12 in Westmount, because at the time the Unitarian Church of Montreal, which is at the eastern extremity of Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, was nonetheless apparently under the jurisdiction or within the territory covered by Station 12 rather than Station 11. And Anthony Pompa basically just told me I was under arrest. Like, there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He had been sent there to arrest me. He had essentially been ordered to arrest me. It's not that he saw something that I was doing and that he decided, was worthy of arresting me. This had all been prearranged. This had already been decided upon, I presume, by his superiors, who ordered him, I believe, to come and arrest me. And when I asked him, what I was being arrested for, he said public nuisance. But he didn't, I think, provide any more detail than that. I'm not sure if he even knew any more detail than that. But when I looked into it further, it became clear that I had been arrested for allegedly violating Section 176.3 of the Canadian Criminal Code, which prohibits disrupting the order and solemnity of religious services. So essentially what had happened is that leading members of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, including Jeremy Searle, a NDG city councillor, and Valmir Bourdon, former president of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, and some other people, had persuaded Station 12 police to arrest me for disrupting the order and solemnity of church services. Even though my protest is outside the church, even though I don't make very much noise, and even though my protest is pretty well invisible from inside the church. This is where the sanctuary of the church is, and as we can see, there are 4 narrow slit windows. 2 of them are too high up for anyone to see me through them. The one on the far right is completely blocked by a memorial to the Montreal firefighters who were killed when a wall collapsed on them when they were fighting a fire started by the church's transsexual organist. The church was originally on Simpson Street in Montreal, just north of Sherbrooke, and one day in, I believe, 1987, May of 1987, if I remember correctly, the church's transsexual organist, Wilhelmina Tiemersma, previously known as William Tiemersma, set fire to her music manuscripts in the church sanctuary and left them burning, and unfortunately, as a result of that, the whole sanctuary of the church burned down. So anyway, getting back to the sanctuary here, this is the only window where it might be possible to see me as I walked by. But to be honest, in order to see me, you would pretty well have to want to see me, because the window is 90 degrees to the right of where people are looking during the service. You know, you'd pretty well have to go up to the window and look through it to be able to see my protest. And you'd only see me walking by, you know, when I walk by with picket signs, because I do circulate outside the church. So basically, you know, anyone who could see me out that window would be someone who wanted to see me out that window. Anyone who didn't want to see my protest, you know, would be completely oblivious to it. So I, you know, asked the Crown Prosecutor to drop the charges. I said what I just said, you know, like, they can't see me, they can't hear me, you know, there's really no reason to, you know, bring these charges against me, and, you know, you should drop them. And he refused. He said, I have witnesses. So it went to trial. He did actually offer to drop the charges if I agreed to sign a peace order, which would have prevented me from protesting for a year. You know, the whole reason for these false criminal charges was to force an end to my protest outside the Unitarian Church of Montreal. It was the first misuse of SPVM police power and the Canadian criminal justice system, but not the last, by Montreal Unitarians, to say nothing of Unitarian Universalists more generally, in efforts to force an end to my very peaceful public protest outside the Unitarian Church of Montreal. So I refused that offer. I said, no, as far as I'm concerned, I'm innocent of these charges, and I intend to, you know, defend myself in court. I'm not signing a peace order for a year. What?
You're the only one?
Yeah. So what's the problem? Does it make me wrong?
No, but
Right.
the majority speaks.
Well, the majority speaks bullshit a lot of the time.
Very true, but I mean,
No, I don't mind being a one-man protester. I don't mind being a one-man protester.
you think it's working?
And considering how they've responded, yes and no. Like, it's not working in the sense of they're doing the right thing, but it is working in terms of lighting a fire under their ass.
Oh, okay, well, have fun then.
And informing the public.
Well, I don't think that's happening, but
Well, you just saw everything, so.
I have no idea what's going on.
But it says Unitarians cover up sexual abuse of children. There's one thing going on. Do some Googling around. So this person walking by is commenting on the one-man protester aspect, you know, basically she thinks that you know, if you're just one person, you're basically you know, outnumbered kind of thing. But you know, often the majority is wrong, and it's certainly wrong in this case in terms of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, to say nothing of the larger Unitarian Universalist religious community. But anyway, getting back to the false criminal charges against me that were brought against me in December of 2000, and which I was able to successfully defend myself against in court. It went to trial. The first actual trial date was November 1st of, I think, 2002. And it was definitely November 1st. And it wasn't in 2001. Yeah, I'm quite sure it was 2002. Was the first court date. There had been a previous date set, but one of the prosecution witnesses had an operation and was not able to attend, so the trial was postponed by some months until November 1st of 2002. So it began. I had quite a good judge. He respected my right to defend myself, and he was even moderately helpful in that regard. He did rap me on my knuckles when I did something that was, you know, not within procedure or whatever, but he generally, you know, allowed me to represent myself. And even the Crown prosecutor was quite good in that he treated me in a very respectful manner. He treated me almost as if I was a colleague when we were going over procedural stuff. You know, he was treating me as if I was another lawyer, even though I was representing myself, you know, when it came down to, you know, doing procedural stuff. So I would say he was honorable. And, you know, I've told this story many times before, but I think it's worth telling, you know, on Remembrance Day weekend, because it is about SPVM police officers and the criminal justice system being misused and abused by Unitarians to suppress my ability to engage in peaceful public protest, to suppress my ability to exercise a civil right that Canadian soldiers ostensibly fought and died for in various wars. World War I would say certainly, you know, fundamental democratic freedoms were part of the reason that soldiers fought. They were fighting against pretty much a dictatorial German Kaiser. They were fighting for, you know, democratic values of France and Great Britain and Canada and so on, as they were at that stage in 1918, which wasn't, or 1914 to 1918, which obviously wasn't quite where we are today, but they were fighting for, you know, free speech and so on. And certainly in World War II, Canadian soldiers were fighting for freedom, democracy, and in later wars, they were doing that, sometimes on behalf of other nations, not so much to preserve democracy in Canada, but to provide democracy in other countries. So I defended myself, and I'm not going to go into all the details because I've done it before, but to make a long story short, when I made it clear through cross-examination of the two prosecution witnesses, who were Jeremy Searle and Val Bourdon, the third person who had, you know, had this operation which had delayed the trial, he was there too. But essentially what happened is I totally demolished any credibility on the part of Jeremy Searle and Val Bourdon in the prosecution phase of the trial. So it never got to the third guy, you know, making his own testimony. What happened is the Crown prosecutor, realizing that he could not prove even one of the 4 or 5 points of law that he needed to prove beyond reasonable doubt to obtain a conviction, threw in the towel. He told the judge that you know, he had been unable to prove even one of the 4 or 5 points of law that he needed to prove, and he asked the judge to ask me to make a motion of non-suit. Now, to be honest, I didn't even know what a motion of non-suit was because I hadn't really, thoroughly studied procedure and so on prior to going to trial. To me, it was like such total bullshit that that it would be pretty well impossible for them to prove their case even if I said nothing. And so I didn't really prepare a whole lot in terms of procedural stuff. And so I didn't know what a motion of non-suit is. Well, what it is if during the prosecution phase of the trial, the prosecutor fails to prove beyond reasonable doubt the case against the defendant, well, the defendant can make a motion of non-suit, which is essentially a motion saying, well, the prosecutor didn't prove his case, therefore the trial should end now, and I should be shown to be innocent, and that's that. In other words, the defendant doesn't even have to present a defense because the prosecutor, didn't even come close to proving his case, and so there's no need to present a defense. So that's what the Crown prosecutor wanted me to do. I told the judge, well, actually I'd kind of like to present a defense. I said, I have the right to a full trial, and I want to present a defense because I wanted to basically provide information that I hadn't been able to provide in the cross-examination of Jeremy Searle and Val Bourdon and so on. I wanted to really show how they misused and abused the criminal justice system in order to shut down a peaceful public protest against clergy abuse in front of their church. I was hoping that the judge would condemn this misuse of the criminal justice system in an attack on free speech and peaceful public protest and so on.